I'm back. This is the final video in this series. Let's get back to the slideshow. We ended by asking about meaning. Is meaning or meaningfulness an intrinsic good, right? Does promoting one's own good or one's own self-interest depend on ways of making your life more meaningful, right? Can you promote your own good or promote your own self-interest without being engaged in projects that make your life more meaningful? That is one way of framing Wolff's question, and it's related to Hooker's question. Both Hooker and Wolff think that subjectivism about welfare is too limited because there's more to promoting your self-interest and promoting your own good in life than just satisfying your desires. Again, returning to the very first video in this series, the distinction between satisfying a desire and satisfying a desire for something that is worth desiring is something that the subjectivist can't explain. And for the objectivist, someone like Hooker or Wolff, that's an important distinction, right? The good life or one's self-interest depends on doing things and desiring things that are worth doing and worth desiring. At least that's the argument that both Hooker and Wolff, I think, are trying to make. All right, so let me go down here. So meaning, what about meaning, right? We talked about, and there's a nice picture of someone sort of raising the question, the meaning of life. It's a scary question. I don't want to think about it. But sometimes we have to ask this question, right? What does it all mean? What's my life all about? What am I doing here? I hope I'm not Sisyphus. We talked about this in class. Am I really just pushing a rock up the hill only to watch it fall down at the end of the day so that I can wake up tomorrow and do the same thing? Is that a description of the life that I'm living? I hope not, right? Okay. So here's Wolff's starting point, right? In her essay, what makes a life meaningful? Can a life be good without being meaningful? That's her big question. Can a person act self-interestedly and advance her own good without securing meaning or promoting meaningful activity within it? So notice, like, she's asking a question that we've already looked at in relation to the concept of happiness. Okay. And moving forward in this course next week, we're going to look at the question, what makes a life or a person morally good, right? What makes an action morally praiseworthy? That's a different kind of question, right? And in your essay, this is looking forward to your essay, I'm going to ask you to try to draw a connection between those two questions, right? Can I promote my own welfare without striving to be morally good in some way? Or can I promote my own welfare without caring about other people in some way, right? Is a purely self-interested and egoistic approach to life compatible with my welfare? Or does my welfare depend in some way on caring about other people? That's looking forward to next week. That's the kind of question I'm going to ask you to think about for your essay. But Wolff, here she is. She's written a lot on value theory, and she's given papers on the meaning of life at conferences. She has blogs and podcasts. There she is, Susan Wolff. Here's how she defines meaningfulness. Meaningful lives are lives of active engagement in projects of worth. So you, as a reader, have to think, like, is that a useful definition? And then meaning arises in your life when subjective attraction meets objective attractiveness. So Wolff combines the sort of two components of value here, right? Meaningfulness is not an entirely objective matter. I have to be actively engaged and attracted to what I'm doing in order for it to be meaningful. And that's a subjective fact about me, right? The engagement part, the attraction part, that's something that I bring to the activity. So meaningfulness has something to do with bringing yourself to an activity, being engaged in it, being attracted to it, like really being in it, okay? Being in it makes it more meaningful. But that's not enough. It also has to be something that's worth my attention or worth my time. And that's the objective part. There has to be something objectively attractive about the activity for me to really derive meaning from it. It's not enough that I just devote myself to it and actively engage in it. So, I mean, think of someone who is actively engaged in the project, as I said earlier, of just counting all the objects in her house. And she's totally into it, right? It absorbs her. She wants to spend her every day of her life just counting the objects in her house for no particular reason. It's just what she wants to do, and she's actively engaged in it. So subjectively, that activity has meaning for her, but it doesn't bring meaning to her life, I think Wolf would say, because like Sisyphus, it's not a worthwhile project. It's a waste of time. Or I don't know, however you want to put it. So, but this is what's interesting about Wolf. She then has to give an account of two things. First, what does it mean to really be actively engaged in your life or engaged in projects, like the project of learning or the project of teaching, or the project of playing baseball, right? Or the project of raising your child, right? Think about all the projects and the roles that you play in your life and all of the activities that you're called upon to engage in if you want to get better at something, right? And so so there's the active engagement part, the subjective attraction part. How is that different from being disengaged and being aloof, right? So a meaningful life is one in which you're engaged, not disengaged. You're drawn to it. You're not aloof from it. Okay, so that's an important distinction that she has to explain, and you can think about on your own. The second part that she has to explain is the difference between a project or an activity or a practice that is worthwhile and one that's not, or one that is objectively attractive or just happens to be attractive to me at this moment in ways that I can't really explain or justify. Okay, that's sort of, she moves from this definition to some kind of argument to show that one's self-interest depends in some ways on not just being actively engaged, but being actively engaged in projects of worth. And that makes your life more meaningful in the way that she intends, and that is an objective measure of value or goodness in your life. Okay, but again, it's not purely objective. There is a subjective quality to Wolf's account of meaningfulness. Right, it depends on something about me. Otherwise, it's not going to make my life better or promote my good or promote my self-interest. So you could say she has a kind of mixed view. She combines subjective and objective elements of meaning to explain how promoting meaning promotes your good. So here's her central question. Does meaning come? So is meaning purely subjective, or does it have objective elements? And so she asks this question on page 64. Does meaning come from the experience of fulfillment, no matter what its cause? So let's say I feel fulfilled by counting all the objects in my house at the end of the day. Is that enough to show that the activity was meaningful? Or is a meaningful life or a meaningful activity one in which a subject is fulfilled by activities suitable to the experience, where it's not just that she experiences fulfillment, but that, I don't know, in some sense, the experience of fulfillment fits the experience, right? It's worthy of being fulfilling, right? Where the cause of fulfillment matters, right? If how you come to be fulfilled makes a difference to how meaningful the life or the activity is, then that suggests that meaning has at least an objective component to it, that it's not a purely subjective phenomenon. There are more objective measures then of meaningfulness, if you answer yes to the second question here. So, well, what's the right way to go? Well, she considers a test case here, right? In order to answer this question, right, this central question, to determine whether meaning is more subjective or more objective, she looks at a test case. So imagine someone whose judgment of some aspect of her life has changed, right? So she gives the example of a woman who was blissfully in love for, let's say, 20 years of her life, and then midlife discovers that the man she loved has been using her all along. Okay, so imagine that. So her judgment has changed, right? When she looks back on her life now, right, she has a different attitude toward her past life now because she's made a discovery that the past 20 years my husband has been using me. And so up until that moment, she would have said about her past that those were good years. But now she looks back on her past and she's changed her judgment or attitude toward that part of her life. This is on page 64, where the example comes up. All right, so the question then to ask is, well, does she experience a loss? When she realizes that her husband has has been using her all those years, right? So those years seemed meaningful to her and happy, happy and meaningful. But now she has a feeling of loss. Well, what has she lost, right? Has she just lost a sense of, like, does it just seem like it's no longer a pleasurable memory? Like the memory is no longer pleasurable? Has it undermined her happiness? Is that all that it's undermined? Or does she now experience a loss in meaningfulness? Right? Does her life now seem less meaningful? That's the question. When she discovers, so presumably when you discover that your husband has been using you for the last 20 years, that will cause misery. You will become more miserable now than you were before. But will you now think that, has your life become less meaningful as a result of that discovery? That's Wolf's question. Well, let's say the answer is yeah. It seems less meaningful now. But why, right? What has she really lost? Has she just lost the feeling of happiness, or and the sense of having her desires satisfied? If you try to analyze that, which it would be annoying to her to try to analyze that probably at this moment, but if she tries to analyze it for herself and she's honest with herself, has she just lost a feeling or a sense that, like, some of my desires are being satisfied? Like now, my desire to be with someone who loves me is no longer being satisfied, and my feeling of happiness is gone because I see that he's been using me. Is that all I've lost? Some measure of happiness or some measure of, like, desire satisfaction? Or have I lost something else? Well, look, if all I've lost is a feeling or the sense that my desires are no longer being satisfied, then that's a way of saying that meaningfulness is a more subjective quality. What makes your life meaningful on that view is just like feelings of happiness, feelings of having your desires satisfied, right? But you might say that she's lost something more valuable in its own right or independent of that. That meaningfulness is not just a matter of it doesn't just break down into feelings of happiness and the sense that your desires are being satisfied. But there's more to the idea of meaningfulness than that. And that's what she's lost, right? A sense of purpose or whatever that is, right? And that would suggest that meaning is more objective, okay? Depending upon how do you answer that question. So this is sort of, right, her complicated argument. I'm trying to sort of work through part of the dialectic of it. And that's where we end up in this slideshow. I'll leave you with that question, right? Can meaningfulness just be reduced to measures of happiness or, the felt experience of pleasure? Can meaningfulness just be reduced to, desire or preference satisfaction? Or is meaningfulness something distinct from that? Right? Where, right, making my life more meaningful goes beyond just increasing levels of happiness and pleasure or satisfying desires of mine. Right? I think Wolf is ultimately moving in the direction of thinking of meaning as, a fundamental good that is distinct from hedonistic value and distinct from subjective values like desire satisfaction. It sort of objectively or intrinsically makes your life better. How, right? Well, the measure of meaning for her then is partly objective. It's not just a matter of feeling fulfilled or feeling engaged in a project, but it's like feeling fulfilled and engaged in a project that's worthwhile. And that's where we started, so that's where we'll end, right? Ultimately, can we draw that distinction in interesting ways? The distinction between a worthwhile project and something less worthwhile, like Sisyphus, right? Does that distinction matter when we're trying to measure, the quality of our life, right? In terms of its happiness, but also in terms of its meaningfulness, right? When we're trying to promote our self-interest, promote our own good, how important is this idea of being engaged in worthwhile activities, right? I think that's the question that Wolf leaves us with. Right? Okay, so that's all. I will see you next week. Hope you have a good weekend.